Hey everyone, Mark here with the Government Vault again. Today we have a pretty cool video featuring Senator Crenshaw from Texas, where he talks about the enormous, I wanted to say huge, enormous, whatever word you want to use, push by the Democratic left today to electrify virtually everything in America, from cars to furnaces to gas stoves to you name it. They want to electrify everything. And Representative Crenshaw has a very interesting take on it and some of the challenges associated with that. So, without further ado, let's get started here and check out this video.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here today to discuss yet another horribly unrealistic rule proposed by the EPA. This rule would require that we reduce CO2 emissions from power plants to such an extent that most coal and many natural gas plants will likely be forced offline by the end of the decade. So we're in a country.
Well, I try not to interrupt too often, but that's really important since I believe the number is somewhere in the neighborhood of 70% of electricity is produced by either coal or natural gas. And within 10 years, the new emissions will say all of these must either be updated or forced offline in 10 years. That's a pretty short timeline to build that much infrastructure.
Where our energy demand will increase by at least 30% over the next couple decades, this EPA wants to reduce our energy generation, which is just genius. I heard earlier that power plants are the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in America, and so we have to save Americans from them. Yeah, they're also the biggest emitter of electricity. Yeah, electricity. And I don't know how that doesn't matter to this administration or the entire Democrat Party. Why does no one seem to have an answer for how we might replace that power generation, replace that electricity? Why won't anyone from this administration or the other side of the aisle acknowledge how physically impossible it is to replace baseload energy with renewables? I'd love answers. Answers, for instance, how we're going to come up with a landmass the size of South Dakota, but the amount of solar and wind farms necessary to replace such generation. Or the
Interesting point. State of South Dakota. Maybe we'll just move everybody out and just build up wind farms and solar, let alone all the cabling you need to run in order to make it make it work.
thousands of miles of additional power lines, or the additional steel required, the copper, the cobalt, all of the critical minerals. Where's that going to come from? There's just some whimsical assumptions that'll all work out because Greta Thunberg says it will.
The other piece of that is that all those minerals he mentioned, primarily at this point in time, since the Biden administration is cutting back on mining of critical minerals, they're all coming from China. So, do we want to actually give China more business? My guess is not.
Now, if the goal is to protect Americans, maybe protecting their ability to heat their homes or cool their homes in summer might be important. And not a single American is actually harmed by CO2 as a pollutant, and yet that's been the claim by my colleagues in this hearing as we all breathe out copious amounts of CO2. It's not a pollutant giving anyone asthma. Can we at least stick to the science if we're going to have this discussion? And if the claim is that additional CO2 warms the planet over time, then we might consider the fact that if the U.S. completely abolished all CO2 emissions, then it would have a negligible effect on temperature and climate. And that's not according to me, that's according to all relevant climate modeling. A carbon-free America by 2050 would reduce CO2 concentration by a mere 2.2%.
We're not the problem, folks. 2.2% is next to nothing.
And a negligible effect on the climate. So once again, we find ourselves in a really simple policy discussion about costs versus benefits. This EPA seems content to impose massive costs on Americans without any clear benefits to speak of. I don't think the mission, the original one, of the EPA was supposed to be to reverse human flourishing, but it certainly seems that that's the goal now. They want to remove power generation from an already stressed electrical grid. And for what benefit? None. Just some hand-waving and sloganeering about saving the earth and protecting people and our children. But catchy slogans and angry teenagers from Sweden are not a good excuse to upend the American way of life and threaten the reliability of the power grid. Mr. Nasty, you mentioned that over 55,000 megawatts of existing coal is already scheduled for retirement by 2032. And because of this proposed rule, we got another potential 155,000 megawatts at risk of retirement. I just have a question. Is there any real chance that this loss of generation gets replaced by reliable energy or even intermittent renewable energy?
Well, I mean, even if theoretically we could fill that gap with natural gas generation, as you've heard multiple witnesses testify, this rule just put a chilling effect. I mean, I have clients that are trying to build new gas. This rule freezes everybody in place, not just because of the general uncertainty, but as of May 23rd, last month, any plant built after that date is subject to things that don't exist today. And who's going to invest and finance that project? Right. And so it's a problem that we're not going to solve. And to the point of EPA modeling what coal plants are, it's not EPA's job to say whether a coal plant is going to retire. It's actually, under the Clean Air Act, the state's job. And EPA is running right through that stop sign and modeling a rule, predicting and something that's contrary to the data. And actually, the Clean Air Act contemplated that and told them, no, you're going to actually have to ask the state's opinion, and they have not.
Very interesting. Unbelievable how this administration is just running right over Americans and putting the cart before the horse. We're going to electrify everything, but we don't have the infrastructure or the technology in order to do it. So what are we going to do?
Mr. O'Laughlin, could you build upon that notion of potential investment in reliable baseload energy because of this rule?
Yes, the rule, I mean, there's been this choice between reasonable environmental regulation and reliable electricity. I agree we don't have to make that choice, but I would say this is not a reasonable environmental regulation. It's going to force unproven technologies onto plants, and operators like ourselves that have to answer to consumers are not going to invest in things that they can't reliably depend on to meet their needs and create further stranded costs above what's already been created by this rule. So
The other piece of this that's very key to this is where's the money going to come from in order to do all this? The U.S. is already at 32 or 34 trillion dollars in debt. Where is the money going to come from in order to pay all this massive amounts of infrastructure needed to make this happen?
it is going to cause us to not invest in our current facilities, and it's sort of shut off natural gas as an option because it's got the same problem, unproven technologies to try to replace our coal fleet.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, there you go. Some pretty interesting facts. So we also have another video that you probably ought to check out where Senator Kennedy just gets into Andrew McCabe and talks about the Steele dossier and how little the FBI actually did to investigate that. So maybe you want to just check that out next. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.